Hello and welcome back to another episode of my space exploration speedrun. At the end of last episode we launched ourselves into space, and at the beginning of this one we'll be setting up the space science. So here I'm doing a bit more inventory management, moving resources into the warehouses and also keeping the machines in those chests. We only get one big assembler for free, so we're going to be using that for the science itself, and then we're going to be using a small assembler for the belts for now. It turns out that you get given for free plenty of water barrels in order to research the water ice research. So once you research water ice, you can turn water ice straight into water through the electric boiler. This really saves on the amount of barrels that you have to send up into orbit. So here I'm checking what resources are missing from the ghost setup. I make sure that I place down the lube assembler properly, and then I end up placing down the recycling facility to turn the barrels into steel. There I get rid of the ghosts for the extra decontamination facilities because we only get one for free. And here I place in all of the water barrels into the chest. This ends up meaning that we have about 1,000 cosmic water to deal with, and each cosmic water produces 5 science. So we have equivalent to 5,000 science when we only need a couple hundred. Here we use some of the free space belts that we got. Now everything's running and we're finally doing space science. At this point, I'm deciding on what I should leave behind in orbit and what I should take down to the surface with me. I'm putting away all of the resources that I would traditionally send up. Here I realized that the space capsule research for free travel down actually is locked behind space science. But I decided that the water ice research is more important. So we're going to do an emergency burn, which means that we want to minimize our inventory as much as possible and then put it all into the rocket capsule. So here I'm leaving as much stuff as I can in orbit. I'm also putting all of the machines into storage chests so that the robots in orbit can use them if they need to. Here I managed to fit my whole inventory into the space capsule. Last episode we accidentally left the surface scan on for too long and it uncovered a really large region, so we trimmed the surface down again. Here I realized that the wire conditions weren't working properly, so we want to make sure that we're sending the requests down to the surface so that the rocket gets loaded. Here I'm checking whether or not I'm going to bother recovering the compromised space shuttle. Since I dumped all of my jetpack fuel into the resource chests in orbit, I have to go pick up some more. Here I start to figure out what resources I need for the Vulcanite build, and I realize that my nuclear production hasn't actually been running. So at this point I fly over to this little iron patch so that we can produce a lot of gears for blue belts. Here I'm just copying another smelter column, giving it a little bit of fuel. Now I'm placing down the gear assemblers. They're going to be half productivity, half speed. Move the science belts over a little bit. Here I'm checking on the space research, and then I'm moving the roboport. And then I realize that the logistics belts are actually locked behind space science. So I decide instead of crafting the belts directly, I'm just going to put the gears into a box for now. Here I decide that I need more uranium production, because all of my extra Navis planets are going to be nuclear powered. So there I run the sulfuric acid for mining the uranium. And then I'm just covering the patch. I do a bit of belt snaking in order to get enough capacity on each belt. Here I'm spending some time connecting all the sulfuric acid between the pipe fluid boxes. That task isn't quite done, but I'm off to do something else. So I see that all of the blue circuits are stacking up on this belt. This belt will eventually feed the tier 3 production, module production, but at the moment it's not. Here I'm routing some of the batteries through so that I can set up the meteor defense. These buildings are very important in order to block the meteors from destroying your factory. So also a good time to fix up all the belts of the mall, making sure that every belt has a continuation on upwards. Here I'm spacing out the logistics belt, the blue belt a little bit. And I'm sending concrete up to the meteor defense. And the last item to pass through is the batteries. Since I grabbed all the blue circuits off the belt, I decided to put a box down temporarily, even though I didn't power it. One of the things about watching you run in retrospect, you see all the mistakes. Time save for next time. Here I decide to set up an extra 4 lanes of copper because the electronic circuits isn't saturated yet. This smelter column above is meant to have 4 lines, but it only has 1. So I pass through an extra 3. I decide to mine this copper patch that is up next to the uranium. These dead trees keep getting in the road. The bots always take forever to charge. Here I just decide to fly away from the bots. Here I realized that the auto cargo launches wasn't actually occurring. So I just adjust the setting on that. And here I'm manually crafting a couple of trains. I go up and finish the task of mining the uranium that I started earlier. I do the math and it turns out that this amount of uranium could support 16, but I only end up setting up... actually, no, it is 16, never mind. Of the two-headed train, I only do one head because I only need to send it back before I need to send it the other way. So here I start going to the left, but then I realize that the bus and the whole factory is that side. So I go back and redo it on the right, and then use a ton of grenades. Here I decide that manually crafting all the engines isn't a good idea. Instead of bothering with signals, I just decide to split the rail lines and move the original one to the left. And the new one gets to supply the right. This line is a little less squiggly than the first time. Here I add in the other locomotive and then I set up the schedule and add some fuel. Just checking on the space science because it seems to be a bit slow. A lot of space exploration is just inventory management. Here I'm crafting a whole bunch of warehouses because I need them in orbit in order to take in all of the requests that are expected to be sent up there. I realize now that the base isn't limited on copper anymore, it's limited on coal. Eventually we'll have to figure out what we want to do with the coal and we just decide on adding in the nuclear. So currently we're using about 200 megawatts and this nuclear plant should create 480. So with the fuel requirement no longer necessary, all of the coal that we're mining can go up to the oil build instead. Just checking that the space base is still running. Figuring out what I was missing when I went down and placed it all. Here I decide that it's actually more important to get the tier 4 assemblers because they offer more module slots, and if I can put more module slots it means that I can get more productivity from whenever I make the uranium fuel. Productivity practically means more free resources, and if you add productivity to uranium fuel you can get an extra 60% on any fuel value that you get from the uranium. Here I finally add in some substation production. I'm always leaving the bots behind. I also realized that I don't have a lot of the intermediates that I need to craft things, so I don't have any electronic circuits, I don't have much iron, I don't have much copper. It gets really annoying whenever I start handcrafting stuff. So here I'm checking the status on the requester rocket, and it turns out that the receiver side is actually full. If a cargo landing pad has any items in, it will not accept items from any cargo rocket that's trying to send things there. Here I'm setting up the water for the nuclear plant. I actually have two different nuclear builds, one's 1.2 gigawatts and this one's 480 megawatts. I decided to go with the smaller one because I don't really have the proper Covarex production yet. I'll most likely also be building the small nuclear plant on the Vulcanite planet to begin with. Here I'm manually hand feeding the uranium production. Making sure the power is connected. And here I go place down the tanks for the steam battery. The idea behind this reactor is that it doesn't fill up the tanks until they're below a certain threshold. So basically the heat pipes, the reactors, the steam all acts as a big battery. So if your consumption is way lower than 480 megawatts, it doesn't keep consuming fuel. Which is really important in the early game because the base isn't consuming as much power as the uranium supply is actually keeping up with. So here I managed to squeeze in some meteor defense modules, and then I send the belt down a little bit, and then I place down the meteor defense buildings. You'll see that most of the belts are saturated at this point, except the plastic. I'm hoping that the extra power that we added will reroute some of the coal up to the plastic. At this stage I'm crafting a bunch of radars and chests and tanks in order to craft the cargo landing pad and the cargo launch for the Vulcanite expansion. So we have our logistics rocket on the right, but we'll have a separate rocket just for the mall items. This will mean that we can pack a whole bunch of items into the rocket without having to worry about all the intermediates and stuff. At some point I may not manually craft the cargo silo and the landing pad, but for now I'm just doing it manually by hand. Very tedious with all the inventory management though. There we go, we now have a landing pad and we're crafting the silo. So I clear out a bit of trees up here. Then I place down the silo. Here I'm checking if there's any other items that I need to send to the left of the mall for low density structures. Most of the assemblers and machines and all the rest that use low density structures, you assemble them in orbit, so I don't need to send it over to the mall. So here I set up a belt with the cargo modules being sent to the left. I also add rocket fuel to the bottom half of the heat shield belt. So here I'm setting up one inserter to be blacklist, one inserter to be whitelist. The one that's whitelisted will only insert when there's less than one capsule in the rocket, and then this other inserter will only insert 100 cargo sections. And the last thing I need is a little bit of liquid rocket fuel. So now our cargo rocket is being prepared, and we're going to start packing it with items for the Vulcanite and Iridium planet. Here I do a bit of prioritization of the resources. So I'm increasing the priority of the Vulcanite planet, the Cryonite planet, the Beryl planet, and the Vitamelange planet. So two of them will have 2 extra Nauvis resources, and 2 of them will have only 1. Here I'm checking up on the uranium supply, I'm checking up on the bus. I'm also checking in terms of location where I want to place my base on the Vulcanite planet. Here I end up packing all of the items that I need for the full 1.2 gigawatt nuclear, even though I'm only going to be sending 4 of the reactors. So here I'm turning the warehouses that I crafted earlier into storage warehouses for orbit. And here I'm looking at all of the different resources required for the Vulcanite build. So I run around grabbing the right amount of modules, and then I start crafting all the pulverizers that I need. I don't know why the pulverizer has such a long craft time compared to everything else. It also only stacks to 5. A little annoying. So after packing all of the nuclear components, it turns out that the build was trying to create a whole another copy of the nuclear stuff. So I decided to temporarily turn the inserters away from the belt so that the steel can go over to the pulverizer. So I decided the section between the right lake and the bottom lake is probably the best. It has the right amount of iron, oil, vulcanite, iridium, coal, and copper. Since I'm going to be using delivery cannons to send my resources between planets, I'm setting up the assembler to create it on the mall. Here I'm deciding what I'm going to do in terms of sending stuff over to the Vulcanite planet, and I decide that I want to send the heat shielding, low density structures, and potentially even the explosives over to the Vulcanite planet. Here I'm packing enough stuff for an oil build. And I'm packing a ton of miners. I also pack enough furnaces for 2 smelting columns. One of them is going to be copper and one of them is going to be iron. I also grab a ton of grenades, but then I also realized that Nauvis doesn't have cliffs, but every other planet does, so I need to go set up a build for cliff explosives. Here I go check on the nuclear reactor, and it turns out that one of the circuits was missing so that the auto insertion didn't tick over. Anyways, while I'm down here I fix up a bit of a meteor mishap. Here I'm checking out all the researches, and I decide on getting the space capsule because I want to be able to go up into space and then come back down personally. I also decide to just get around the power issue and add some more coal production, because I want the base to start producing properly. I also decide to not send the coal left. The only reason we were sending the coal left to begin with is for the burner mining, but we don't do that anymore. Here I go over and check the two items that I need also for outposting, which is the industrial furnace and also the casting machine. The casting machine is locked behind a space science, but I already have the industrial furnace recipe, it just needs a bit of concrete. So instead of routing concrete all the way over from the left side of the base, I decide to quickly add some to the end of this. It's really just a matter of getting the stone brick, the stone and the iron, and some water. So there I have the stone to sand, and then I just pass in a little bit of iron. And then I grab some pipes to route the water from the oil build over to the concrete production. Now we have concrete on the right side of the base. In addition to providing the concrete for the industrial furnaces and the casting machines, I also provide it for orbit here. So here I'm routing some coal and iron, and this is for the grenades and the explosives for the cliff explosives. Grabbing some more belts. And here I'm deciding where I want to put the cliff explosive production. So here I siphon off a little bit of the petrol and the water. I also realize that I'm very limited on water at the oil build for some reason. So I go on a mission to tap into a little bit of a lake. Or a pond. Now we have some more water, but I want to direct the flow properly. So I use some pumps and tanks to make sure that the flow is always traveling towards my base instead of away. Here I check the requirements for the vulcanite build, and it turns out that I need about 150 longhead inserters, so while I go down there for my personal supply, I also put some in the cargo rocket. So here I'm making the explosives, I'm making the grenades, I have the steel for the barrels, and I finally have the cliff explosives. Almost. I have to do a bit of rerouting of the petrol line, but it's fine. So here I'm still deciding on how I want to do the delivery cannon module. So I want to have 3 delivery cannons on Nalvi's side, sending the resources over to the vulcanite side so that I can save on having to produce the heat shield tiles and the low density structures. At this point, deciding that I don't have enough time in the episode, I decide to go up into space to make sure that the space base is working properly. So here, because I know that there's roughly a certain number of inventory slots, I empty my own inventory and try and reduce the inventory of the rocket so that we don't lose any items when we go up into space. So there I dump a whole bunch of stuff into the chest, and then I put as many of the high value items into my inventory so that they don't get deleted when we land. The reason that I came up here was just entirely to place in these extra warehouses so that the cargo pad can actually receive all of the items that I want to send into space. I realized that I put away my stack inserters, which is probably not a good idea. I'll have to come back up in order to fix the stack inserter issue. So here I'm doing a whole bunch of inventory management, emptying out the cargo pad and helping the inserters. And I finally have the research to go from space to the planet without having to crash land. And that concludes the episode. Thank you for watching, I'll see you next time.